director of the Indigenous program at Sundance Institute. I'm also a short film programmer for the Sundance Film Festival. And I'm from the Kiowa and Mohawk tribes. My pronouns are he, him, and I am very honored and excited to have Warwick Thornton here after the screening of The Beach. Hey, Warwick, how you doing?
Yeah, good, brother. Yeah, very well.
Yeah. Where are you calling in from?
I'm in Adelaide in pre-production on a new movie, so hotel room in Adelaide. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, I think, just wanted to start off, real quick too. I think with this film, I'd love to kind of hear from you, just sort of like, if you could sort of walk us through sort of the origin of this of this piece. It's a really incredible piece, and I'd love to hear sort of how it came about.
It's a real funny one. I actually don't know the origins of it. It kind of happened in a really weird way. I was quite burnt out, from making films and abusing my body in all sorts of strange ways, and I kind of really needed to take a break. And then I was stupid enough to go, well, let's make a movie about taking a break. And there must have been a point when I just looked in the mirror, in the bathroom and thought, oh, yeah, maybe I can be in front of the camera. Something egotistical happened, and in hindsight, it's like, why would you do that? Why would you want to be the subject of something? So there was something weird that happened in me where I thought that I could be the subject of something, and I wrote up like a 2-page kind of outline, and then handed it over to NITV, which is the National Indigenous broadcaster here in Australia. And I said, I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to do something like this, which is sort of like not a back to nature Bear Grylls kind of thing, but a kind of and not necessarily a slow, the slow TV movement kind of thing. I didn't know what it was, but I said, I want to do something. And they said, yeah, okay, we'll fund it. And that's kind of where it happened.
That's cool. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
It's just, yeah, I didn't understand what I was getting into, and I didn't understand what I was doing. I think, it was very strange.
Well, I think also too, I think knowing some of your other work and how you do sort of blend elements of fiction and nonfiction together, like there's not really like, I might be wrong about this, but I never get the sense that you sort of start out with sort of these hard and fast rules. You sort of let the process, you sort of are figuring out the process as you go through some of it. But in some ways, it almost sort of feels like the inverse of something like The Dark Side, where with that, you're starting with sort of the material of like a nonfiction account, and then assigning it to actors to sort of act as ciphers for those accounts. Where with this, it feels like you're sort of starting as the subject, but also acting as an actor for yourself. So it's almost sort of this circular kind of thing.
Yeah. The lines between fiction and non-fiction, and something imitating something else, are so blurred to me. I have no, that sort of really. I don't want to call it elitist, but that real sort of what is a documentary, I just don't care about anymore. I just make it up as I go along. And if I have to guide a subject when you're making a documentary into a certain place, I'm very happy to do that. Even myself in a way, I don't, sort of like. I gave up on the whole, what is a documentary and what is fiction and what is non-fiction quite a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, I also think too, Indigenous person to Indigenous person too. I think also like a lot of those, especially when it comes to storytelling, like so much of like kind of, I think, and I'm speaking in a very sort of pan-Indigenous way here, but I think like the lines of kind of what you were saying of like what is sort of considered empirical truth versus sort of what is not true is like, again, like those don't really necessarily exist. It's more about sort of the journey and the place that it takes you and the interpretation, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, sort of it's almost spirituality is, what is spirituality? Is it fiction or is it non-fiction? You know what I mean? It's kind of like when you live with your ancestors every day. Well, how does that revolve in your actual, what is the truth in a strange way? If you're looking at a forest and you're looking at every single tree and you're believing that each of those has a spirit, you're kind of already blurring the lines of what is and what isn't in a way. So I'm happy to just wander around and hug rocks and trees just as much as the realities of paying the rent, or what I mean. It's all blurred and it's all crazy and it's all very exciting. It's a spirituality in a strange way wrecks it, in you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Wrecks non-fiction.
Yeah. Well, I think also too, I think, there's something, and I know it might not have, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but like I know from sort of how this was originally like broadcast, how it was done in episodes, but also within the US when A24 came on board, they had it where it was playing on a loop essentially. So I think that, and also with a lot of your narratives too, it does sort of follow a circular, not structure, but sort of a circular pattern of how, characters move,
Yeah.
different, that sort of stuff as well.
They here in Australia they called it a roadblock, where they basically through different channels actually put it on. So if you flicked, you kept seeing me rock up again. You know what I mean, between SBS and NITV and that. And I kind of not I don't prepare for anything like this us talking, but I did have a coffee this morning and I was going, what the hell is it about? You know what I mean? And I kind of the only thing I could come up with is it's about listening, being able to stop and listen. And I think what A24 did, on that weekend is, tuning in and tuning out and being able to just listen and, and then flick over to the news or, put some music on and then come back and I'm somewhere else and I'm in a different space mentally as well as physically. And just being able to listen. And I was trying to listen to the land and listen to myself and, listen to the spirits in a way. And so you're watching me and you start listening to me, listening to them. And it was sort of, I think that's where the slow TV idea came, ironically, slow TV is more real, is much more a reality than anything that we conjure with our edits and our music and our attention spans in a way. So it's much more reality based for me when you listen and you're trying not to. It's less about education or trying to tell a story and more about settling and actually being comfortable as yourself, whether you're in your kitchen cooking, or if you're, I don't know, at a pub or a disco. You know what I mean? It's just slowing it down and actually being comfortable and not having to, what's it about? Why is he there? You know what I mean? Those sort of questions are always arise, but it's like, oh, he's just there and he's just doing whatever he's doing, and being comfortable with not having to have a crescendo or an epiphany, or me telling you, educating you as an audience about something that's incredibly important that I have to give you knowledge about. It's like, don't worry about that. Just settle. And, it's almost like when you light a campfire, when you light a fire and everyone sits around it. There's a point where everything becomes silent and we all internally have our own moment. And then after that, because we're humans, we need to talk and we need to annoy each other. That's when we start telling the stories. But that first point of lighting a fire where everyone stops and looks at it and then guesses and thinks about who they are in that situation, that's kind of what I think I was trying to do. And being able to just listen to, listen to the wind, listen to the waves, listen to the chopping board in a way,
Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's cool. Oh, good.
Yeah. Well, I think also kind of like with what you were saying, I also kind of think maybe I'm reading into this a little bit too much, but, I think kind of to what you were saying of carrying the ancestors or being, just sort of acknowledging their presence and having them with you. And yeah, there's something about that with this film because of how you sort of talk. I know there's that account you have sort of your mother and of your grandmother being a chef, but also your son, also shooting the piece as well too. I mean, could you talk about that a little bit of like sort of just how you did incorporate your family, both
Yeah.
memory and also in a practical sense too.
So I needed to draw on something. I couldn't just sort of walk around killing things and eating them. You know what I mean? They needed to be more drama, and the only drama I could give, because we could, we could, by blurring those lines between fiction and non-fiction, we could have much easily built, some kind of crocodile hunter slash, superhero. There's the crocodile, and there's me, and and create this sort of drama. And it was kind of like, well, that's been done a lot before, and I'm a terrible hunter. It's I'll go for the easy things like mullet and small fish, and because that's easy. And I didn't want to create that kind of, I don't know, wildlife documentary. The irony of wildlife documentaries. The tiger is really upset. You know, its cubs are really hungry. They're just shooting anything, and they're just putting this whole dictated fiction on top of just a whole bunch of bloody shots of wildlife, and they're creating the narrative through that in a way, and I always find that hilarious. We call wildlife um, documentaries, but ironically they're more fiction than bloody DC in a strange way.
Yeah.
In the way what they do with the voiceover.
Yeah.
Sort of like, the tiger is going to the bank. It hasn't paid its mortgage in 3 weeks. It's like, you just make shit up. What I mean? It's all just complete made up. With a little bit of with if they get the right moment, if they shoot the right moment. But I kind of didn't want to do that. But it needed drama. So that's when I sort of needed to draw on personal experiences and personal
Yeah.
why the answer of why am I there. Obviously, I've been running amok for a bit too long, and I'm a bit burnt out, and I need a break. And ironically, I can get a television station to pay for my holiday. Um, but then the realities of like, oh shit, there's going to be a camera in front of me the whole time. I don't really know what I'm doing. I had those ideas of those stories because I knew I needed more than me just wandering around aimlessly killing things and eating them and making pretty bowls of food.
Yeah.
And so that I had that. I didn't know what they were and where they would come in the actual arc of me actually being there. I had a set time of being there. I knew I wanted to talk about those things. I was really fearful about talking about those things because I've never been to a shrink in my life, and I probably never will. You know what I mean? But I needed to get some shit off my chest in a way. And in a strange way, by choosing my son to shoot it, he was my comfort blanket. He was my safety. You know what I mean? He's an amazing cinematographer. And to be able to, because so I was talking to the audience, but I was actually talking to my son and being able to tell him about me, the stuff that I've never told him about in a strange way. He had inklings of, the madness that is Warwick Thornton and the stupidity that is Warwick Thornton and the ego of Warwick Thornton. But having him there and being the comfort blanket, it was actually, I wasn't talking to a shrink, I was telling my son about who I am and how I feel. So I think that's why it kind of worked in a way, because I sort of set myself up to have someone that I did need to talk to. And it feels like I'm talking to the audience, but I'm actually talking to the cameraman who is my son and telling him these stories. So I think that worked really, really well. He has a different idea, because I'm a cinematographer as well. He has a very different idea of cinematography than me. He likes wide lenses and he likes to come quite close, which I find really impersonal. It's like, get away from me. But so we had to, in the first day of the shoot, really, of me wandering around, he was really up close to me, and I'm like, piss off. And he's like, Dad, you asked me to shoot this, so you're just going to have to, drop your barrier with that. You know what I mean? These are the lenses that I like. I'm a younger generation. Younger generations generally like wider lenses because they want to see it all. right now. It's a weird, you know what I mean? An older generation of cinematographers like longer lenses because we know that there's things happening off screen, and we're very patient. We're very happy for that to happen off screen. But with the younger people, you see younger cinematographers always use wide lenses because they need to see it all right now and have it in frame always. You know, so we had a little bit of a fight on the first day, and it's like, well, you've asked me to come, and you're going to have to give up your inhibitions or your emotions about me being close to you. And it was like, okay, yeah, that's true. I need to let him be close to me, rather than being 10 meters away on a longer lens. That more sort of much more what's the word, selective, and disengaged. The disengagement of a long lens, whereas like with a wide lens, you've got to get right up close. So you're actually you're very much, your presence in the documentary is being felt by the subject.
Yeah. Well, I also think too. I mean, I think that was a pretty smart choice on Dylan's part. Not to disagree with you on the wide versus, because I think it's there's also sort of I guess sort of the poetry of using those lenses where there's the perceived distance between objects is another thing where it looks much wider on screen, but in reality it is much closer. And I think that it does sort of play to kind of the isolation that I know that you were also trying to kind of like express, but also the isolation that maybe you needed for this healing too. So
yeah, and he so there was a lot of stuff that I tried to dictate, in the actual structure of how it was shot and all that sort of stuff, and very quickly I had to walk away and just go on the journey and trust my son. You know what I mean? So it was a sort of in a bit of a way, it was kind of like it was creating that trust in a way, and having to relinquish me as a cinematographer and me as a director. You know what I mean? Even though I kind of directed it, I kind of didn't direct the shoot. I directed the edit, which we'll talk about later because there's something really bizarre happened in the edit.
Yeah.
And then because I am a bit of a control freak and I have a wonderful, wonderful ego. You know what I mean? Especially as a cinematographer, I don't really have much of an ego as a director or as a writer, but the cinematographer in me is just this complete wanker. You know what I mean? And that kind of, I had to get rid of that and give it to my son, which was, and that kind of really did start the process of me being truthful about why I'm there and what I'm talking about. Because it started the process of me actually having to drop the barriers and drop the importance. That's where it started, and that was a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Well, I think also somewhat segueing to that, because I do have some questions about the edit, but I think each episode does have there is a structure that you can follow sort of through each of them with how it works on sort of like how you're foraging and hunting for things, and then there's elements of confession throughout, and then also sort of the it's centering to not necessarily centering, but like it being somewhat anchored around a dish that you're making. And so what I'm curious about also too, was that something that when you were shooting, you went out and were thinking about, or was it something that, like kind of to what you were saying in the edit, you guys sort of found that this was the structure for how you wanted to tell this?
Yeah, as I said before, it came out of like a 2-page document. I don't know what I'm doing, but this is where I will be, that kind of idea. So the shoot very much was like a hunter-gatherer kind of scenario. It was what we would, because we're working with the land in a way, and the tides, and all that sort of stuff, and the winds and that. So the elements sort of dictated what we could do and what we couldn't do, and it very much was, Dylan was a hunter-gatherer of the image, as I was as the hunter-gatherer of the food. You know what I mean? In the landscape, and there was ideas. We had ideas, especially because I had ideas because it's not like I had a supermarket with all those herbs and spices, across the road. I actually had to get all those herbs and spices and for the cooking scenarios. So I already had structure around, well, if I catch this, I can create that. That was already, there was structure in that. I might talk about this if I feel like my wall, the wall that I put up as Warwick Thornton is lowered enough. I might talk about this personal thing, whether it's self-harm or alcoholism or whatever, you know what I mean, that kind of stuff. But I might not. But so there was that kind of structure. So it was day to day, and Dylan really did, and so did I, you know what I mean? It very much was, we just shoot what happens, and then, but I so believe, and treat it like a wildlife documentary where we create that structure later, and not knowing what that structure is, but knowing and trusting that we can edit and we can create drama and we can create an arc purely through the edit, Yeah, so it kind of, it was a lot of trust, a lot of gathering of ideas, and then that knowing and trusting that we can go into an edit suite and create what we need to create, you know what I mean, and where the peaks and the bottoms and how it ebbs and flows through the arc. Doing that later. Just shoot everything until we run out of data cards, and then we'll find something in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like shooting a documentary, but cutting it as a feature. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Totally. Well, I think also kind of with that too. I mean, and I might be wrong about this, but I read that the kind of the shed that you were in was something that was constructed for the film. Was that something that, I mean, in terms of sort of this whole process, was that something that you were actually like living out of, or was that just more kind of for the shoot that you would go there?
It was. I tried to look for somewhere that was that romantic, and I couldn't find it. So it was like, okay, we'll build it. We'll build it where we want, so that is the shed is the foundation. You know what I mean? And that's the fiction in a strange way, that it was built and it was built in that beautiful romantic cul-de-sac where every day it would be it'd become an island, and I'd be either locked on the island because the place is full of crocodiles. You can't really, it's sort of, so there's very, so you're stuck there, or you're not, or you're stuck on the other side and you can't get back there. And using that as sort of a metaphor of who I am and where I come from. So that was very much structured fiction, to build that thing, put it where it is, and use the tide as emotional journey of, as a human, mentally, are you sort of stuck on an island and you just can't reach the mainland, back to civilization, or do you want to leave civilization and lock yourself up on an island, and trying to play with those kind of ideas, but not sort of bash it over people's head. It's just there. You can read it if you want, you know what I mean? You don't need to read it, you know what I mean? You can just, it's the kind of show where you can just enjoy the cooking, you know what I mean? Don't care about his mental issues. I love the food, you know what I mean? You can just enjoy it for that, or you can, you can listen a little bit harder and go, oh yeah, he's pretty fucked up, but it's good he's talking about it,
Did you get to keep the shed?
Well, because it's on, this is not my country, it's, other people's country. Yeah. So, getting permission from the elders to build it is the first thing. And then we got permission to build it, and we said, two options. We can pull it down so that all there is just footprints in the sand, you know what I mean? So you'll never know it was ever there. But if you like it, we'll leave it. And they liked it, and they wanted to keep it, so we left it there. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit too about, you'd mentioned something that happened during the edit just before. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that at all.
Yeah, I had to walk away from the edit because of my because of vanity, really because of vanity. I had to walk away from the edit, and I had to let the editor do her do what she needed to do to create that structure, because I found it very quickly in the edit. I was like, don't use that shot. You can see that I've got a big belly, or don't use that shot because I look like shit. Well, irony is that you do look like shit, and I needed to walk away. I created the structure with her, and then I had to walk away and let her use the shots that she needed to use, because just my vanity of what I look like and what I wanted the audience to see of me, and how handsome I got no teeth and a beard like this and completely crazy. So I had to walk away and let her do what she needed to do to tell the story about me, because I was too vain about my image being portrayed in the movie. Yeah, it was difficult, because we all want the perfect headshot, and we all want them to be more than we really are visually in a strange way. And I had to walk away. And she wants, and use the ugly shots of me, and use the not so pleasing ideas of me. Yeah, so it was another sort of truth commission for me, truth serum. You know what I mean? Sort of having to relinquish the control of your image in a way, which I never, what I mean? That was sort of like the stuff that you kind of, why the hell would you want to be in front of the camera? Actors, I always find them to be the most strangest humans. There was a point in their lives where they stood in front of a mirror and said, yeah, you can do it. You can be in front of the camera. You've got that kind of power and that charisma. It's just kind of bizarre. I love actors. I work with them every day, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're just a very unique beast, with different dietary requirements, you know what I mean? How to direct them. But there is a point where they did that. And then I did that to myself. I went, oh yeah, I'll be in front of the camera. And that was like, okay, I didn't expect that the most important thing was to walk away from controlling your image and letting someone else get to the truth of you, and giving them that access.
Yeah. Well, it's like, from everything you were saying, it's like, it feels like this whole thing kind of from the beginning to the end was really a process of letting go of control of so much, like of not just, even just how you identify as a cinematographer and an artist to your son, but also, again, to even just within the edit and, as a filmmaker, which is like, with all of your other films, this is markedly different in the sense that like you can definitely see, not to necessarily use the term like auteur, but like, that level of control over everything with the image, with the picture and stuff like that. And I'm wondering, like, for you, if, it kind of to what you were saying before, it reminded me, and talking about this process a little bit of that, there's that quote or that story that David Lynch told where he went to go see, I think a psychiatrist, and he asked him, well, like, if I continue seeing you, will it affect my creativity? And he said, well, I have to be honest with you, it probably will. And David Lynch just was like, okay, no, thank you. And moved away and stuff. But I'm curious, like with this, it feels like that this work was a process of healing, a process of maybe kind of coming to some sort of realization within yourself. But I'm curious for you if, because this is so markedly different from so much of the other work that you've done before, especially in terms of the authorship of kind of how you were saying some of this, like, do you feel like it's going to change your work going forward?
I think that's exactly right about sort of talking to a shrink. You know what I mean? I think as artists, the more we bottle up, and the less we talk about it, and the more pressure, and you know what I mean? It's kind of like it's almost like making a film is talking to a shrink. You know what I mean? That's how I like that in artistry. I like, we're all supposed to talk about all of our emotions at the moment, but actually, sometimes it's good to bottle it up and use it, brew it and distill it, and use it in fiction or in, you know what I mean? It's strange. You know what I mean? It's sort of
Yeah, it's like
I,
something
I, I
comes.
like that. You know, if you talk to a shrink, can you paint anymore? Or, you know, if you talk to a shrink, can you, you know, because if you, yeah, I love what you said about David Lynch. I never thought of it that way. I think that's awesome. So, you know, and finding other outlets to release that pressure, you know, or, you know, ironically, I said, you know, distill and ferment. So alcohol's got a lot to do with creativity and emotions and that sort of stuff. You know, I mean, you know, some of my best work was written taking large amounts of drugs. Sadly, you know what I mean. It's kind of which has its problems, and you know, and it's great at the time. You write some great shit, but you know, as a longevity of being a creative, it's bad for you in a way. It's great for um, doing getting shit done. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's bad for you in a long term sort of thing. But you know, how many? You know, it's we don't work on the basis that he who does the most paintings or he who makes the most features is the winner. You know what I mean? I think a
Yeah,
good career is for four amazing feature films. You know what I mean? If you make four good films, that's all you need. You don't need to make 120 of the bloody
yeah,
things. You know what I mean? Yeah.
definitely. Well, I think also too, I'm curious, like, and again, this is probably both a question of how you shot it and also how you edited it, but how did you sort of navigate the tonal shifts in the piece? Because in the edit, it seems like it's, you know, you, not obvious, but I can understand probably more how that happened. But when you were filming, was it more just kind of like getting everything out at once and then just sort of working backwards from that? Or, yeah,
Lots of I don't know if I understand that one, but lots of tricks, lots of tricks. You know what I mean? And after like actually spilling my guts about something, you know, those little conversations. There's probably one an amp. Um, that tonally, after me talking about it to my son, who is the audience, um, that created a tonal shift that we would. Okay, well, what are the images, or where do we emotionally we would be in a different state after me talking, and that would sort of dictate what we would do next, in a way. Little tricks. My son shot the whole thing at 50 frames per second. You know, it's not like when we're shooting, you know, when I'm shooting Super 35 or when I was shooting Super 16, you just can't shoot at 50 frames per second everything because it's just way too expensive and that. But now with data and digital, just put the camera at 50 frames, and you can put it, you know, for any dialogue sync, you can always just put it back to 24 or 25 frames per second. But he had that slow motion 50 frames per second image always, that if we ever wanted to just slow it down or, you know, emotionally lag the image. So it's just like there's something wrong here. You know what I mean? There's something Warwick is becoming more internal, which, you know, speeding the camera up, which slows the image, will always do. So it's sort of like we always had that trick of we could actually, we had everything shot so it's in slow motion, so we could play that if we wanted to, you know. So that's just a small trick. Just shoot everything at 50 frames, and you can resync it later. Don't care, because it's important to have that image to be looking that way in exchange, you know, for the
yeah.
edit.
This may sound like a bit of an odd question, but I mean, do you feel like this is maybe the most personal work that you've done? I mean, just given that you're centered in it, or do you find something else that you've done to be more kind
No,
of?
well, it's the most personal because of me being in front of the camera and talking about things that I would never talk, even tell a shrink in a strange way. You know, the audience is my shrink. I guess is what I'm saying. You know, even though, and they're great shrinks because they can't talk back to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You spill
yeah,
my guts and
yeah,
feel good about it without any kind of like, well, Warwick, what are you going to do about that? You know, how does your mother feel about this? And how's your relationship with your father? You know what I mean? It's like I don't get those questions from the audience. They just spill my guts and then walk away like, yeah, I'll talk. Or, 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 or my son. The interesting thing is that all of those stories Dylan never brought them up ever again. We've never talked about them. He knew that it was just me telling him, aka telling the audience, but we never like, Dad, I never knew that happened to you. How do you feel about that? You know what I mean? We never had that conversation. It's just a sort of it's a beautiful bond that, okay, I'm listening, Dad, and I'm sure you don't want me to judge you, so or direct you into, you know, some path that I think that's better for you, Dad. He never talked that way to me. You know what I mean? It was just, I'm listening, Dad, which is such a beautiful thing. You know?
And that is such a thing, I think, just with given the formal approach you're taking with this as well, too, where it's like there is kind of to what you were saying, where it's like if you do just want to stick around for the dishes or like the land and stuff like that, the land shots, you can. But I think it's also, and again, the approach, because it is something that I think is unique, not only just to episodic type works, which I don't know if you would consider this an episodic work or more of just a film broken up in, 6 parts. But I'm curious to know if that was something maybe that was more a result of how you approached the film versus maybe how you wanted to go about it. If listening was something that was sort of embedded from the beginning, or if it was something that sort of, would just sort of happened at the end when everything was put together.
The sound in it is, just as important as the image.
Mm-hmm.
So listening, and I grew up. I first started before becoming a cinematographer, and then a writer, and then a director. I started in radio, so everything was about listening, and creating creativity through sound. You know what I mean? So it kind of, all the foundations and all the elements and all the tricks were there, and it was just about actually doing it in a strange way. That just having to do it, so standing up, that's the start, and then we'll see what happens afterwards. But knowing, I've been around for quite some time as a filmmaker, and knowing all the tricks, the knowledge that I have of how I can sustain or manipulate through the edit or through sound, through the soundtrack, the music, you know what I mean? It's pretty simple when I'm talking about some sad shit, you chuck the cello in, you know what I mean? Or juxtaposing it, putting in a punk song while you're talking about something really dark and using a happy song, you know what I mean? Fake, all those kind of crazy tricks you just know. So it's just the process of doing it, and then sort of emptying the bag of images and going, oh, okay, that's really good. I look ugly in that, but so having to walk away, letting the editor do all that sort of stuff and helping, with the structure and that. But it's almost like you get into the edit street and you go, okay, what have we got? What have we got? How can we turn this? And I think the episodic, they're only 26 minutes long, and I think that's the perfect. If this thing, it was on a cycle with A24, which I so love. I loved their bombacity. They had no fear. It's like, no, we're going to put it on. It's just going to roll. You know what I mean? And that beauty of you being able to just tune in and tune out, tune in and listen. You can be cooking and just listen to this thing, not even seeing the image, and. Or you can sit there and watch it. It's just, I think what they did was really, really, really special, and just looping the hell out of it. But if you try to create just a bookend, beginning, arc, end, I think it'd be really boring. So I love that they're only 26 minutes long, and you know what I mean? And they've all got a theme and all that sort of stuff. I'm contemplating making another one, but I just need to go off and play feature director for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And this, rather than the beach, I'll call it the pub. Very, very Australian. You know what I mean? You got the beach and you got the pub. So you know what I mean? It's sort of a pub with no beer. That's.
Well, you could also probably do something around a different landscape too, I think.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, go to the desert, which is a much difficult place to actually sustain your food. You know what I mean? It's much harder to. The coastal living, the tribes in Australia, all the coastal tribes, massive, big, 1,000, a tribe of 1,000 people, I mean, if you go where I come from, which is in Central Australia, our tribes are like, a whole tribe, a whole language, a whole very clear spirituality that 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 is very different to the tribe next to them. You know what I mean? 80 people, 100, 200 people. You know what I mean? Because of the desert can't sustain. It's a very simple concept that people should recognise. Is the
Yeah.
desert can't sustain too
Hmm.
many people, you know what I mean? And that naturally happens through selection, you know what I mean? It's only a certain amount of food. So to do the same thing in the desert would be much, much harder
Yeah, definitely.
for me,
Yeah.
especially being a terrible hunter.
Well, I think also, with that, which I think is another, I, I would say probably for me at least, I think like this and probably Samson and Delilah are the most that are tied to a specific landscape. And I think
Mm.
that just because I feel like with both of those films, the landscape is as much sort of a character, which I know that sounds very corny and cliche to say, but I do think it's true. It's something within your work where I think, and I do think, again, sort of indigenous person to indigenous person, there's always that sort of thought process of when you're going into another land, even if it's not your own land, of kind of like, cool, like what's the story here? Like how am I oriented and all of this and
Yeah.
stuff. And I was curious to know, like with you, I know you talked about sort of working with the local community there to get permission and things like that, but how did that also sort of affect how you felt you moved through the space, or how you could conceptualize sort of this piece as well?
Well, there's an irony that, when you rock up, in someone else's country, you don't need to appease the spirits of that land necessarily, but you have to recognize them so that they can, so that you, and that's the respect in a way, recognizing, you know what I mean? And not expecting the land to give you anything instantly, you know what I mean? You need to sit in the salt water, you need to almost, we have the thing where the sweat that we have, we wash ourselves in the water, our sweat, and then the spirits of that country recognizes your sweat because the way you smell is different depending on what country you're from, and that's how kind of spirits work out. They're like, who the hell are you? What are you doing here? And then you give them your sweat, and then after a couple of days they recognize your sweat, and by giving your sweat, you've recognized them, and then they might actually give you some food. You know what I mean? You know, or whatever. However it works. Or they won't get the crocodiles to eat you, or the snakes to bite you, or the wind to blow down your freshly constructed romantic hut. You know what I mean? So it's kind of it's a process. It's a total process that happens everywhere that I go.
Yeah,
Um, you're always looking to listen to the land,
yeah,
um, and to make sure that you're not upsetting anybody.
yeah. Well, I think I got like one last sort of question for you with this. I mean, I've had a great time speaking with you.
Yeah, no, this has been beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But
you're my shrink at the moment.
um, like one thing, and this has been more something I've been particularly interested in, especially among, like, I mean, I make my own films as well too, but I think also with other indigenous folks making films and stuff too, where I think that there's a unique thing where you can get on the level with some of the stuff, in the sense that I think that filmmaking can be as much of sort of like, to what you were saying, sort of a gateway to spirituality in a way that is not necessarily inherent to a lot of other cinemas. Like there
Yeah,
are obviously instances of that, but kind of to what you were saying, where I'm thinking of, like, again, like other works that you've done, like The Dark Side, like with where that's like, that's very inherent in that film, and I think with something like this as well too, and both deal with healing and stuff like that. But I wonder, like for you, how your filmmaking practices helped you sort of with that aspect of your life, and just sort of how you move through the world.
yeah. Well, that idea of bottling up your emotions and that sort of stuff, and then releasing them with a certain amount of energy and anger, and you know what I mean. The stuff that really gives you the shits about colonization or representation, or you know what I mean. It's important to have a voice. It's important to listen, but important to speak. You know what I mean. And I always find that cinema is the it works so much stronger, not with a physical health, but with a mental health. You know what I mean? It is an actual, in a strange way, a hospital. I always get embarrassed about, you know, the amount of money. The movie I'm about to do is way over 10 million. That for me is a hospital in a community, a clinic, you know what I mean? A school, you know what I mean? And I always felt that they were much more important. You know, that sort of physical health, education was much more important. So I was always slightly embarrassed about the amount of money I spent. But then you have to understand that what we're doing as in cinema and with radio, and you know what I mean, just with the arts in general, is it's a mental health we're playing with. Not only by just getting shit off our chests and educating a wider audience, but to see a black person or a native, you know, an indigenous person from the world on the screen, and not necessarily doing the stoic, how incredibly, you know what I mean, going to the darker sides of indigenous communities and talking to ourselves about what are our problems, but us talking to ourselves is the most important thing, and that, you know, what's happening in a community in I don't know, in North Carolina, an indigenous community in North Carolina, really does. When I watch a documentary and I hear what they're talking about, really makes me connect and to actually look at our communities and how the connections that we have, you know what I mean? And that stuff is really important for me. You know, we've kind of, when, you know, with fiction, it's we are there to tell stories, to educate, to entertain, but balancing education and entertainment is sort of like, I think Indigenous storytellers can do that really, really well.
Yeah, and I think also too, kind of just to your point, you know, I think, and I always think of the same thing too. My mother works in healthcare, so it's
Yeah,
indigenous communities and stuff. But I also think it's like, you know, there is sort of there's an added responsibility, I think, to indigenous people working in this field, or like, I guess you could say in this mode, because there is also the thing of it's us also helping to move our cultures forward to an extent, like not in an assimilation standpoint, but like we're also keeping and expanding our cultures in a way that you know, has always been there for us to do. And so I think, you know, and again with your films too, I think that there's some of the most like formally daring and like really unique works out there that are really inspiring to a lot of people. So yeah, so I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the work that you do
no
as
way.
well. Yeah.
You know, people say to me, "Why do you make all those bloody sad movies?" You know what I mean? And it's like, well, we've actually got the market. We've got the pen now. We've finally been given the pen through cinema and through radio, and now we're rewriting our history to tell the truth before we could move on. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, okay, we've got you've had your history books. Now we've got our history book, and it's not necessarily a pen. It's an actual cinema screen. And now we're trying to fix the history, the bullshit that was written about us, to get it right, and then we can move on. You know what I mean? It's kind of like we need to fix the past before we can move on to the future. It's sort of that's the way it is. You know?
Yeah, definitely. So well, with that, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in this conversation with myself and Warwick Thornton. And yeah, thanks again for checking out The Beach, and hope you can watch it again too. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.